Wars in Gaza and Ukraine have no end in sight. So can a group of G7 leaders weakened by problems at home unite on the world stage and find some solutions? Tonight, they did. A $50 billion deal to help Ukraine was agreed, paid for with frozen Russian assets.
Another reminder that to Putin, we're not backing down.
It's another lifeline for Volodymyr Zelensky's country, but will there be more to come? Even he's now asking how long Western unity can last. Many of the leaders in Italy know this could be their last G7. Will the next set of leaders provide the same level of support? I'll be speaking live to Dominic Waghorn, who's at the summit, and we're going to be live in Johannesburg. Asking whether a coalition government in South Africa is any closer. A victory for pro-choice activists. The US Supreme Court rejects a move to restrict access to an abortion drug. Also ahead, the cost of missing 1,000 days of education. I speak live to Malala Yousafzai about the Taliban's crackdown on girls in Afghanistan. And after Russia accused the journalist Evan Gershkovich of spying on behalf of the CIA, one of his colleagues at the Wall Street Journal joins me here live in the studio. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. I'd like to start tonight with the G7, the meeting of Western leaders happening right now to discuss the biggest global challenges from Gaza to Ukraine. It's a chance to make major decisions, and tonight they've done just that. A deal to send $50 billion to Ukraine has been agreed on, paid for using frozen Russian assets. The meeting is also all about planning for the long term. But is that even possible when, for some of those attending, it could be their last time at the G7? The polls suggest that's the case for Rishi Sunak. Joe Biden's under immense pressure back home, while Canada's Justin Trudeau's popularity is fading after 8 years in office. European elections just delivered major blows to France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Olaf Scholz. And there's reports Japan's Prime Minister Kishida could be ousted in the autumn. Only Giorgia Meloni, the host, came out of recent elections well. Italy, so often viewed as a political basket case, looks most stable right now. Domestic issues are distracting world leaders, right when they need to think long term. And the contrast couldn't be more stark with the likes of President Xi and President Putin, both set to rule however long they see fit. Together, they represent the threat of a new world order, an alternative to the G7. The question is this group of battered and bruised world leaders able to use their strength collectively to help prevent that new world order? Well, in a moment, I'll speak live to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's at the G7 meeting. But first, here's his report on what happened on day one.
They filed in like walking wounded, seeking sanctuary from battles back home. A parade of lame ducks, dead men walking. In tomorrow's papers, the metaphors will write themselves. The only leader not sinking in the polls, their host, the only one whose smile seemed genuine. For once, Italy's government is the most stable in the alliance. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni hoping to build on that, to forge success here and give Ukraine's President Zelensky more help. But it is direct bilateral American support for Ukraine, a security pact between the two countries, that will be the biggest headline from this summit.
Our goal is to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capabilities for the long term. A lasting peace for Ukraine must be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself now and to deter future aggression anytime in the future.
We have signed the strongest agreement between Ukraine and the US since our independence.
Allies have also agreed on using frozen Russian assets to lend $50 billion to Ukraine.
Now, this is something that I and the UK have personally championed and led on for a while now, so it's very positive to see it close to the finish line. It will make an enormous difference, and it demonstrates the G7 is absolutely united in doing everything it can to support Ukraine to defend itself against Russian aggression.
Hanging over this summit, though, doubts about the future of the alliance and its members. More unfortunate pictures, perhaps, each leader's national flag falling from a great height, like some of their political fortunes. But whatever the optics, this was one military display Rishi Sunak was not going to miss. They're all distracted by challenges back home, or potentially on borrowed time, but determined to use what they have left of it to help Ukraine. Will that be enough, though, before the winds of change sweep at least some of them away?
And Dom joins me live now. Dom, good to see you. And we'll talk about the political sort of future of all of these leaders who were there at the G7. But just let's begin by talking about the top of the agenda, which was, of course, Ukraine, a huge package. But really picking up on how you ended your piece there, is it enough? Because even Volodymyr Zelensky is questioning how long this Western unity can last.
Well, look, there are two big achievements, I think, at this summit so far. Yalda, one of them was on the sidelines of the summit and one of them was central to the summit. And central to the summit was this breakthrough in diplomacy to bring about this deal which will lend Ukraine $50 billion worth of aid. And that's interest from the $300 billion worth of assets, Russian assets that were frozen after the beginning of the war. And there were differences between the allies as to how that could happen. It almost looked like it was going to fall apart yesterday, but they put it back together and they've managed to get that deal across the line. So that is a big deal. It's also going to really anger the Russians, and I think it does send a very clear message to Moscow that yet again from the allies, they're united and resolved to help Ukraine for as long as it takes. But actually on the sidelines of the summit is a much bigger, an even bigger agreement. This is a 10-year bilateral American-Ukrainian security pact, rather like the kind of pacts that America has with Israel. It is going to promise a lot of money, a lot of materiel, talk of F-16 fighter jets, of a lot of armour, a lot of Patriot missiles, but also this key commitments to talk and immediately consult whenever there's a threat to Ukraine. Immediately after that threat happens, a threat is real to Ukraine, and to promise that help for 10 years. So all of that, I think, is important for Ukraine, and it does send this clear message of unity and determination for as long as it takes. But the problem is the optics at this summit are sending a very different message. We have effectively potentially 6 lame duck leaders filing through here. It says a lot when the most stable government is Italy's, normally the kind of problem child of the alliance. And I think the question really tonight is, what is the point of these promises, these deals being made by these leaders, if many of them, if not all of them, are going to be out of power in the near to immediate future? And that, I think, is a risk and a danger for the alliance. And I think it poses a question about the long-term future of the alliance itself, because these winds of change are sweeping through Western capitals and threatening leaders and the alliance itself.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, frankly, we could see Donald Trump at this G7 in 12 months' time, Dom, and he's made his views on many of these alliances very clear. Yeah,
Donald Trump, who at the moment is the front runner to win the election, if you look at some of the opinion polls, is a man, as we saw through his first term in office, who is deeply opposed and kind of viscerally antipathetic to the whole idea of multilateral international organisations, particularly the G7. You know, if he does win, then this time next year he could be 6 months into dismantling NATO, which is the fear of many of his allies. He may not even turn up to the G7. I think the big point to remember, Yalda, is that when he came to the G7 in his first 4 years in office, he caused all kinds of mischief and meddling, but the counterbalance to that were some very strong leaders, obviously Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron in the heyday, really, of his time in office. Merkel's not there anymore. Who knows what will happen to Olaf Scholz? He's not as strong a leader. And Emmanuel Macron could be a lame duck president because of the election he is now going to unleash on the French parliamentary election that could see the far right sweeping to power. So for all those reasons, I think there's a lot of doubt about the G7. And I think the Ukrainian leader will go back to Kyiv sort of, for now, consoled and comforted, but I think with some serious doubts about the long-term commitment of the West, of the alliance to his country. And that, I think, is obviously everything that Russia's president would like to see from this summit for the months ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a security pact that Biden also signed with Volodymyr Zelensky, but it's one that Donald Trump could tear apart. Dom, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Now, details of the charges facing the American journalist Evan Gershkovich have been revealed for the first time. The Wall Street Journal reporter was arrested in Russia in March 2023, accused of spying for the US. After more than a year in detention, his case has finally been filed in court. He's accused of gathering secret information about a military facility on the orders of the CIA. Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal, and the US government say he has been wrongfully detained. Well, with me now is Gordon Fairclough, a world coverage chief at the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much, Gordon, for joining us here on the programme. You know, you and I have spoken several times over the past year.
Sadly, it's been more than a year since we first spoke about it.
Yeah, that's right. It was March 2023. And here we are. There were details at that time that were sketchy. They weren't really being revealed. They seem to have given more information now. Did this come as sort of expected? You knew that it would be something along these lines?
Sadly, not a surprise, but it's still really appalling to see a colleague indicted on what we know to be false accusations.
And he's now expected to stand, in this trial more than a year. So just tell me how the Wall Street Journal is hoping to support him at this stage, and how are they working with the US government?
Well, we're in very close contact with the U.S. government. Obviously, his trial is likely to be in Yekaterinburg, not in Moscow, which will make it more difficult for American diplomats to have consular access to him and to be there for the proceedings. There's an enormous amount of secrecy that surrounds these kinds of cases in Russia. The trial will almost certainly be completely closed to the public, so we're unsure even how much we will get to find out from Evan's lawyers.
Is that deeply worrying that it's not in Moscow? It's almost away from the gaze of the world?
Obviously, we would prefer that he not be moved and that he be in Moscow and closer to the American diplomats, but the case will be tried in Yekaterinburg.
You know, over the time that he has been kept in prison, we've talked about his state of mind, how he's doing. Whenever we have seen images of Evan, he has at least appeared like he's in good spirits. Yeah. How's he doing?
Well, I got a letter from him a couple of weeks ago now. I think the winter was especially tough, but he's an incredibly tenacious spirit, and he's spending a lot of time reading and trying to exercise as much as you can when you're in a cell 23 hours a day, but trying to keep himself strong.
And we also heard from his family a few times, who revealed how difficult it is for them, but they also revealed some of the letters and just how he is responding, and he's trying to, keep his sense of humor in the darkness of all of this.
He absolutely is. I mean, he was, when the war in Ukraine first started, he was here in London in our newsroom, and it was his sense of humor that kept us all going through some very late nights, and it's heartening to see that he's being able to hold on to that.
I mean, it is an incredibly dangerous situation because, of course, this is a situation where a journalist gets picked up, gets accused of spying for their government, ends up in prison for over a year, and his fate still remains uncertain.
I mean, he's effectively a hostage right now to geopolitics, and Russian officials from President Putin on down have made it quite clear in public statements that they are hoping to have some kind of prisoner swap in which Evan is involved. But to see your colleague become a bargaining chip, and he's picked up off the street just for doing his job, it's really just deeply unsettling.
Does the Wall Street Journal have any other reporters now in the country, or is this sort of deterred?
No, we do not, and we're not the only ones. So of course it's, we've not just lost a year of Evans reporting, we've lost a year of a lot of reporting at a time when understanding Russia is incredibly important.
And is there a sense that you get from the US government or your dealings, the Wall Street Journal's dealings, that they are at any point closer to any kind of prisoner exchange with the Russians on this?
Well, we've reported that a deal seemed to be coming together earlier this year, in which Evan and Paul Whelan and Alexei Navalny would have been swapped for some Russian prisoners held in the West. That Then, of course, after Alexei Navalny's death, that kind of unraveled. But I do know that the two sides are still talking, and we're hopeful. We're hopeful that Evan will be home soon.
Of course, Evan's situation is different to Alexei Navalny's, but when you see those situations, someone as high profile as Alexei Navalny being killed,
It's horrifying, of course, and it's just heartbreaking for all of us that Evan and his family are having to go through this.
When Evan does come out, and we hope that he does, what will you say to him, and what does he say he'd like to do when he's out?
I think he is hoping to tell his story and get back into journalism, and obviously we want to support him to do that. I'm not sure, when I see him, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to say much. I think I'm probably just going to be crying.
Well, Gordon, we're grateful that you've joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, the African National Congress in South Africa says it has reached a broad agreement on forming a coalition government, but no details of the deal have been released. President Cyril Ramaphosa had been expected to speak this evening. Well, our Africa correspondent Yusra El-Bagir joins me now live from Johannesburg. And Yusra, we were hoping to hear from the president. That hasn't happened as yet. He did have this Friday deadline to form a coalition. And does it now appear, from what we're hearing, that he is close to announcing that?
I mean, they haven't, as you said, Yalda, shared any details on the agreements that they've reached, but they're making it clear that they have indeed reached some sort of agreement. Parliament is in session tomorrow. It will be the first session for the 7th National Assembly in South Africa's democratic history. So there has to be some sort of foundation or grounds in which they're meeting. MPs will be sworn in the morning, and then later on in the day, there will be a secret ballot with MPs voting for the next president of South Africa. And that is expected to be current sitting president and leader of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa. They do have the largest number of MPs in the National Assembly at the moment, 159. But this agreement is really about moving forward. There's been a lot of contention around the ANC teaming up, or at least working closely with the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. It's a white-led, business-centric, centrist party that actually vows to get rid of affirmative action policies that came in after the apartheid rule, like black economic empowerment. And actually the ANC is dealing with a lot of backlash, not just from other opposition parties, but also internally there's splintering. So Ramaphosa is kind of expected to need to really show fortitude in the next period as he deals with these hiccups. But he is, for many people, the man to do it, especially within the ANC. He did lead South Africa's negotiations, the African National Congress negotiation during that transition in 1994, 30 years ago, from white minority apartheid rule to the democracy that South Africa has today. So he's doing that again 30 years later, and using the term government of national unity again, which Mandela wanted at the time to bring in a peaceful transition post-apartheid. Then it was kind of an option with the ANC. They had 62% of the vote. They were in a comfortable position politically, but needed that government of national unity to usher in stability and peace after a really turbulent and violent period. Now, the circumstances are different. It's the same terminology. It's the same chief negotiator, but it is essentially with the ANC on the back foot with 40% of the vote. And also, they will have to convince legal experts here in South Africa that it is indeed a government of national unity. Without the third and fourth largest parties, MK is the third largest party at the moment, and it is the 6-month-old political party of former President Jacob Zuma, former ANC leader. Cyril Ramaphosa was his deputy president. He's managed to really absorb a lot of the ANC's vote, especially in his home province, KwaZulu-Natal. And they've actually put forward an urgent application to the highest court, the Constitutional Court, to prevent the National Assembly from meeting tomorrow. It was thrown out by the Constitutional Court, but there is a lot of contention at the moment, and President Cyril Ramaphosa will have to weather the storm if he is to continue and complete his second term in office.
Yeah, I mean, Yusra, as you say, this won't be the first time that South Africa has formed a sort of a government of national unity, and Cyril Ramaphosa was so instrumental in the 90s. I mean, it's considered the party that liberated South Africa. I guess the question then is, given sort of the turbulence of the last 30 or so years, how far has the country come or not?
I mean, there are a lot of unkept promises that the ANC made in 1994, including equality, economic equality for black South Africans. And South Africa is currently the country with the highest economic inequality in the world. And not only that, but race is still very much a factor in the country and in this political environment in the election. I mean, the ANC is getting a lot of stick for theoretically partnering with the Democratic Alliance, a white-led party. Ramaphosa, who came in, was voted in 2019 to put an end to the ANC's corruption, years of corruption, was embroiled in his own corruption scandal. So there has been a lot of movement. I mean, when we speak to ANC veterans and say, you know, will the ANC survive this moment? There's a lot of confidence that the ANC will weather this storm because the ANC has been so instrumental in bringing black South Africans the right to vote in the first place. But at the same time, there's a lot of disillusionment. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with how the ANC has continued to empower its own, continued to enrich itself. And Ramaphosa, if he is voted in tomorrow in Parliament, will have to not only prove his credentials as a leader, but also as a reformist of the ANC, a promise that he made in 2019.
Yusra, thank you so much for all of that analysis and bringing us up to date. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, 1,000 days since Afghan girls were barred from secondary school. I'll be speaking to the campaigner and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Malala Yousafzai.
I think if the romance causes a conflict or a dual relationship, then absolutely they must disclose. But if the relationship doesn't cause a conflict or a dual relationship, then why should they?
Would you say office relationships are a good thing?
Generally speaking, of course they are. I mean, you get to meet somebody and really know something about them, you know, their character, how they deal with difficulty, whether or not they respond with kindness to people who are lower down the food chain than they are. So it's a good idea to meet somebody, to take your time and meet someone and get to know them before you start to date them. You know, if you're approaching dating with a clear head, then you're less likely to make mistakes because you're going to be thoughtful. And if you meet somebody at work, then you're probably less likely to rush into the bedroom with them, for example. So you can take the time to consider what is it you really want for a relationship? What are your relationship themes that you're looking for? What are the qualities you're looking for in the other person? And what are your non-negotiables? And that's perhaps the most important thing to get clear about, your own personal non-negotiables. And when you see those things in another person, run a mile.
Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. 1,000 days. That is how long it's been since teenage girls have been banned from going to high school by the Taliban. Afghanistan remains the only country on the planet banning girls and women from getting an education as a matter of policy. Gender apartheid is what it's been called by many rights groups, and there is now a push to have the UN and international community recognize it as a crime against humanity. Afghan women are barred from most areas of public life, cannot attend universities, and are severely restricted in employment. Imagine a mother who can't take her children to the park because it is forbidden. That is the fate of millions of women and girls in the country. Well, one woman who knows the fight against the Taliban all too well is Malala Yousafzai. Born and raised in the Swat district of Pakistan, Malala and other girls in her local area were banned from going to school when the Pakistani Taliban seized power in Swat in early 2009. Broadcasting her repression to the world in an anonymous BBC blog, Malala began her activism to get girls back into school. By March of the same year, girls had been reintroduced to the classroom. But 3 years later, at the age of 15, Malala was shot in the head by a member of the Taliban who thought she had gone too far. The attack prompted worldwide protests, and the United Kingdom moved her to Birmingham, where she recovered without any brain damage. Well, Malala then became the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 17 and continues to fight for girls' education across the globe. And she joins me now live from New York. Malala, it's really good to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. We'll talk a little bit about your own situation, but you and I, over the last almost 3 years now, we've gotten to 1,000 days, have marked these moments at different intervals, just so the world doesn't forget the fact that girls over the age of 12 in Afghanistan are being banned from going to school, and of course women as well from university.
It is a dark anniversary, 1,000 days since the Taliban have banned girls from attending school after grade 6. They are not only denying them their right to education, but they are denying them the right to a future. Afghan women cannot have any participation in politics, in work, in public life. And this complete erasure of women from these rights is a systematic oppression that Afghan women and girls are facing. It is an unimaginable reality that Afghan girls are witnessing, and that's why this is so important for us today to stand with Afghan girls.
I mean, it's not even politics. I just said there in my introduction, the most basic thing where a mother wants to take, her child to the park to play, she is actually not allowed to go out into a public park, for example, not allowed to go to a salon, not allowed to there's been edicts sent out to say that do not leave your homes unless it's absolutely necessary.
Of course, there's discrimination against women in every part of the world, and there's gender persecution in some countries as well. But what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan is a systematic oppression of women and girls in Afghanistan, as you rightly said, from banning them to even see a doctor or visit a park or go to a salon, attend a school, be in politics. And this is the thing we need to note down, that the life of Afghan women before the Taliban take over was not like this. These women were in politics, they were in professions, they were dentists, they were journalists, they were football players, they were part of a robotics team, they were in school. And of course, there were challenges, but the Taliban have made things a lot worse for women and girls there. And here's what is important for us to recognize, that this is a systematic oppression. Afghan women rights activists are calling it a gender apartheid, which means that this needs to be part of the Crime Against Humanity Treaty. It needs to be treated as it is. It is one of the worst crimes that has been committed against women. And this should not just be allowed to happen, and we should not be silent. We should not look away. It has been happening for more than for up to 3 years. And I remember the time. I remember when the Taliban took control again, and people said we should give more time to the Taliban. We should give them maybe 100 days, maybe 1 more year. But we have seen it has been 1,000 days. Schools after grade 6 are still closed for girls. Women are still denied their rights. And as you mentioned, the edicts and decrees every day are announced, and that they are limiting women more in their jobs, in their movement outside their houses, in any opportunity that you can think of. This has to change.
Yeah, I mean, when the Taliban came to power the first time in the 90s, we saw that they banned girls from an education. And then there was this whole campaign of never again, and this is a new Taliban. It's a different Taliban. It's Taliban 2.0. They've changed. They're not going to ban girls from education. And here we are, almost 3 years on, 1,000 days, where young girls over the age of 12, I mean, you hear the heartbreak of an 11-year-old. Someone who gets to grade 5 or 6 is terrified because they know this is the end of the journey for them.
I want to stand with Afghan girls. They deserve an education. They cannot be denied this right. And it's so important for us to show our solidarity and support with them. They are the face of this campaign. They are the true representatives who are calling us that we need to build more pressure. We need to hold our leaders to account. We need to call on more Muslim country leaders as well to step forward and say that we cannot justify the actions that the Taliban are taking under the name of Islam in any Islamic context. The Taliban cannot be allowed to use the excuse of religion and culture to prevent women from their basic human rights and to prevent girls from the right to an education. This has to change. And that's why calling it a gender apartheid is important. And it's important to make it part of the international law so that we can hold our leaders to account. We can hold those to account.
Are they listening, Malala? It's being described as gender apartheid. Many activists have come out, using that phrase. Afghan women who are in the diaspora, those who have also fled since the Taliban takeover. You have addressed world leaders about it. There is a push to have the UN and the international community recognize it. But frankly, there's been silence on this issue.
It breaks my heart when I witness the fact that it has been such a long time. I think Afghan women cannot be patient anymore. It is putting their future and their lives at risk. We are hearing stories of women who in Afghanistan are protesting on the streets and how they are tortured, how they are put in prisons, how they're beaten up. We know that in Afghanistan, the female suicide rate is higher than any other country. It is the only country where there's a higher rate of female suicide. Afghan girls do not see a future for themselves. Leaders, I have seen them proudly say that they care about gender equality and they want to see a world where girls are treated fairly, but we see the worst example of it happening in Afghanistan right now. So I do hope that leaders are held accountable. That's why these changes are important. That's why activism is important. And I hope that everybody who's listening right now, they would call on their representatives and ask them, what are they doing? When they say that they care about women, they care about gender equality, what are they doing for Afghan women? And I hope that we will use all that we have in our capacity to ensure that we stand with the women of Afghanistan.
Yeah, and the reality also is the Taliban are also sending their own daughters to overseas countries to be educated. Malala, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, the US Supreme Court votes unanimously to allow continued access to the most widely used abortion pill. We're live in Washington with reaction. welcome back. The US Supreme Court has voted unanimously to preserve access to a widely used abortion pill. The drug is used in 2/3 of terminations in America, but a group of anti-abortion doctors had called for its approval by regulators to be withdrawn. But the court has ruled that they do not have the legal right to sue. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins me live now from Washington. And James, this is a major victory for abortion rights campaigners and supporters. How's it been received by the Republican Party?
It's been received well, actually, by Donald Trump, who happens to be in town meeting Republican politicians from the House and from the Senate. His reaction to the Supreme Court decision was, we need to be careful about how we carry abortion through the election. But his whole kind of demeanor was that it was a good thing for the Republicans, but it's clearly a troublesome thing for them. The midterms showed us that the support, the traction behind Democratic support that the whole issue of reproductive rights brings to the electoral landscape. I mean, it was a landmark decision, very significant, Yalda, the first big decision on reproductive rights since Roe v. Wade 2 years ago. It's all about this drug mifepristone, an abortion pill. In the United States, thousands of women receive through the post, women who are in states with restrictions and bans on abortions, they get abortion pills delivered by mail, prescribed by people in different states who have legal protections to do so. What happened here was that doctors and people who are anti-abortion, they went to the Supreme Court to try to have that access to mifepristone restricted. As you say, the Supreme Court judges unanimously knocked that out, saying they didn't have the legal standing to sue. So that was a big decision today in terms of the politics of Washington, D.C. Elsewhere across town, we had Donald Trump, the man who will lead the Republican Party into the November election, holding a series of meetings, coming to Capitol Hill, the first time since January the 6th, 2021. Not the Capitol building itself, but the territory where the insurrection took place. And remember, many people inside and outside his own party are pointing the finger at Trump as the orchestrator-in-chief of the riots that day. He talked policy. He spoke about tariffs on Chinese goods, criticised US aid to Ukraine. But essentially, this was an exercise in meeting, greeting members of his party and asserting his authority over them, mending fences too, meeting people like Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, who said that Trump was practically and morally responsible for January the 6th. The two of them shaking hands inside that meeting. Let's have a sense, so let me give you a sense, Yalda, of the kind of response from Republican senators and House representatives to what they heard from Donald Trump today. As a convicted felon, is Donald Trump a liability, sir?
You can look at the polls, whatever you think about the legitimacy of that trial, which there's questions. You look at the polls, it doesn't appear to be, huh?
How can there be unity when he's been blamed by senior Republicans for being responsible for January the 6th?
Well, look, I think that no real Republican with any credibility in the party is still blaming him for January the 6th. Even, frankly, some of his critics were in the room and were supportive and are supportive.
As a convicted felon, does that help you in terms of the election in November?
Trump was wrongly convicted, and y'all could go back to UK with your crap. We love America here. We love President Trump. We are standing for him. His poll numbers only continue to increase with everything that they throw at him. So y'all have a great day.
Donald Trump among friends. Donald Trump was amongst friends and enemies inside that Republican Party today. But clearly the theme, the underlying theme of today, when the boss was in town, the theme was one of loyalty, political necessity, political expediency for the Republicans going forward, the order of the day.
Yeah, very clear message. Thanks so much, James, for that update. Now, the mother of one of the hostages rescued from Gaza at the weekend has told Sky News there are some things he will never be able to tell her about his 8 months in captivity. Andrei Kozlov was working as a security guard at the Nova Festival when Hamas attacked on October the 7th. He was one of 4 hostages found alive during a rescue mission by the Israeli military on Saturday. Andrei's parents have been speaking to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
After 8 months of hoping that he was still alive, but hearing nothing about his condition or whereabouts, Andrei Kozlov's parents simply couldn't believe it when they got the call to say he'd been rescued and was on a helicopter out of Gaza.
When I heard, "Are you sitting down?" I thought it was bad news. I dropped the phone to one side. It fell under the table, and suddenly I heard from under the table, "It's good news, it's good news." And I crawled under the table. "Did you say good news?" "Yes, they're bringing Andrei over by helicopter. He's almost in Israel now."
It was very emotional. It's difficult to describe.
Evgenia and Mikhail flew straight from St. Petersburg in Russia for an emotional reunion with Andrei at a hospital in Israel. It appeared to be the moment his ordeal finally caught up with him.
During the 8 months we've been waiting for him, we feared he would be changed a lot, that he would be a different man. And suddenly, there was this emotional shock. "Mama, Mama, I knew I'd return. Mama, I knew on October 7th that I would go home." I was barely holding it together. I was trying to smile so he'd know I was happy, confident, and calm. When he calmed down and was able to speak calmly, I knew he was the same man. He was strong, confident in himself, confident in his future, and he managed to stay in one piece.
Andrei was rescued with 2 Israeli men, Al-Mokmer Jan and Shlomi Ziv, in an Israeli military operation in central Gaza on Saturday morning.
What has he told you about the last 8 months?
One of the phrases that really scared or hurt us was when he said, "There are some things I will never tell you about." As for everything else, yes, he tells us, but it is as if he's playing storyteller, as if to entertain us. Even the fact that his hands and feet were tied for 2 months, his hands and feet were tied, he tells us as if it were a joke. At first, their hands were tied behind their backs, and he told us how proud he was that he managed to eat with his hands tied, unaided. When they started tying his hands in front, he said it was a gift. It was a gift. We felt we'd got a bonus. We've been given a gift.
Hamas claims that at least 270 Gazans were killed and hundreds wounded in the rescue operation. Video from the scene shows many dead in the densely populated Nuzorat market. Hamas now says that it wants written guarantees from the US before agreeing a ceasefire deal. But the US Secretary of State, speaking in Qatar yesterday, said that some of Hamas's demands aren't possible.
Hamas has proposed numerous changes. Some of the changes are workable, some are not. Here, in a nutshell, is where we stand.
For all the hostages who have returned home, like Andrei, 120 still remain in Gaza, many of them dead. Negotiations for their release continue, but hopes for a ceasefire are, again, fading. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Tel Aviv.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, I'll be joined by the winner of this year's Women's Prize for Fiction, fresh from tonight's awards ceremony.
Coming up on Sky News at 10, Labour launches its Change Manifesto, but there's no new policy and tax rises aren't off the table. Reform UK overtake the Conservatives in the latest YouGov poll, and we'll be live in Munich as the Tartan Army descends for the Euros. See you at 10.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry.
Legal
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. A book set in the early years of Sri Lanka's decades-long civil war has won the 29th Women's Prize for Fiction.
The winner of the 2024 Women's Prize for Fiction is Brotherless Night.
Brotherless Night is the second novel by the American writer Vivi Ganeshanathan. It tells the story of Sashi, a girl whose 4 brothers joined the Tamil Tiger separatist group, and the effect it has on her, her family and Sri Lanka. Well, I'm very excited to say Vivi joins me now, fresh from that awards ceremony this evening. Thank you so much, Vivi, for joining us. I mean, you could hear the cheers and the excitement. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
How does it feel when it was announced? Did you expect it?
Definitely not. I was in incredible company, and I was totally stunned.
You know, when you write a book like this, and I know it's fiction, but it is almost laying bare your own sort of family history and personal history, the history of you know, your family's country, and of course the bloodiness of that conflict, but also the humanity of it.
Yeah, I did a lot of research to write the book.
20 years.
I did. It took me a really long time to write the book, and during that period of time, I was fortunate to meet many people who had lived through that time period, many of whom were not connected to my family at all, and who were really generous with their experiences and in correcting me when I was wrong and answering an endless amount of questions.
Because even though it's fiction, I guess it's sort of the characters are fictional characters, aren't they? But it's almost like the thread and the story does reflect a period in history, and that of Sri Lanka's.
Yeah, it is it's set during the first decade of Sri Lanka's civil war, and it does feature certain historical events that to many Sri Lankans will be familiar and known, and probably to other readers less so. But to people's lives do fit against history. I mean, we're living through some intense history right now. So to think about how that history impacted, as you say, the characters was really meaningful to me. Just
remind our audiences of the period, that period in history and what happened in Sri Lanka.
Sure. Well, the novel is from the first-person point of view of Sashi, who in 2009 lives in New York, and that was when the Sri Lankan Civil War ended. And she's recalling her teenage years during sort of its earliest years, and most people would probably date its beginning to 1983. And the war was fought primarily between government security forces and Tamil militants, but also there were many other stakeholders and players, and among the Tamil militants, primarily the Tamil Tigers, who you mentioned. But yeah, it's a book that is intentionally trying to work against the notion of two-sidedness, and is looking at the language that we use to talk about conflict and is questioning why we use that language.
Yeah, because I guess we use these sorts of numbers in conflict, don't we? 40,000 dead, 30,000 dead, 100,000 dead, disappearances, extrajudicial killings, which happened a lot in that period in Sri Lanka. And yet there are people and lives that are upended and destroyed, and actually lives that also have to continue, even when people face displacement.
Yes, I think I was really interested in writing particularly about how civilian life is affected by the militarization of society, which is of course a thing that we see plenty of today. And so, yeah, to think about what does it mean to try to go to school, to try to maintain friendships, to have a job, what happens to all of the trappings of ordinary life under these extraordinary circumstances.
And you often see that, don't you, in conflict, that in a weird way, it's sort of the banality of the ordinariness of life also continues, even when something so bloody is happening around people, which is what happened in Sri Lanka as well.
Yeah, you do see, the banality, exactly. Like some of the ordinary things that make up our days are also the ordinary things that make up people's days in those spaces. Those things people will try to keep their lives together and go on. And hearing stories from people, and particularly women who had done so much to protect their families and care for their families, perhaps even as the location of their home shifted or their homes were destroyed, was, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Vivi. We're really grateful that you've joined us here on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Well, that's it for tonight's program. Thanks so much for watching. Of course, the news at 10 is next, and I'll be back again next week. Good night.